So again, like I said, the recording will be available after, as well as these slides. We're going to try and keep it to a 20-minute presentation with a 10 minutes of Q&A. But of course, if you have questions for any of our panelists during the webinar, go ahead and pop those into the chat or the Q&A feature of the webinar or the WebEx interface, and I will interrupt our panelists and ask them that question. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, if you are a guest, an attendee, your camera is not on, nor is your microphone. So rest assured, no one can see you and no one can hear you. But if you do have a question, which we'd love to take, please do pop that into the chat or into the Q&A feature, and we'll be monitoring that the entire time. So we are going to cover the problem and solution that that this team worked on, the workflow, some onboarding, and then some feedback that they received from their districts and vendors throughout this process. And hopefully you can take this as a model to see how this might be relevant in your own work. And that's our hope for today. So I'm Caroline. I'm our marketing and comms director. I've been at EdFi I just had my work anniversary, 6 years. Time flies when you're having fun and super busy. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Sai.
Thank you, Caroline. My name is Sai Srinivasan, and I'm the Community Partnership Manager, focusing on the state education agencies' work in terms of onboarding them and providing them both strategic support as well as technical support, and have been with the Alliance for the past 5.5 years, following Caroline closely. Yes, you can reach out to me at this email address if you have any questions or any support that you need from your agency. And I'm going to pass it over to Jada.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jada Shafai. I recently moved into the Product Owner Scrum Master role at the Department of Public Instruction at the Application Development. Prior to that, I was still working with DPI, very involved with the EdFi Alliance as well, but in a different capacity as the Vendor Relationship Manager. Been with DPI for about a little over 3 years and have been working in different organizations just about related or doing technology integrations, either as a business analyst or a project manager. And I'll turn it over to Tom.
Hi, my name is Tom Christensen. I'm developer at Wisconsin DPI on the collections team. Been with DPI for 10 years. I've worked on some other teams, but basically been working on EdFi since the start of our implementation. I think it was maybe started around 2016 or 2015. And then, yeah, I've been in technology for, longer than that. I put 15 plus years. I don't think that's about right. So, yeah.
Thank you, Tom. So, Jada, tell us about the problem that you were trying to solve with the solution that you have come up with.
Yeah, so the immunization information systems are also known as the Wisconsin Immunization Registry, or WIR, has been around for years, and it allows authorized users to enter, update, or view client immunization records. Here in Wisconsin, we have a statute that requires all students to present evidence showing that they are in compliance with the student immunization law. So that means that each school must report to their local health department the aggregate compliance total by school on or before the 40th day. So before the integration, the school nurses and staff access the WIR system to look for a student and then manually get this data from the WIR system and enter the immunization record for each student in their in their student information system. So imagine doing that for thousands of students in each grade level for the entire district. And then after they enter that data into their student information systems, most SIS vendors have canned reports that schools can use to submit that aggregate data to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. So From all of that, we just realized that the immunization record keeping is very time consuming for the school staff, and it requires a lot of commitment from resources by the school to help the families reach compliance. So maintaining the record, our accurate records was very challenging for the school nurses and the staff. After learning about the process from the school districts and the nurses at the schools, we reached out to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services and worked on the immunization registry integration. So it's an API integration that supports an automated exchange of data between the WIR, or the Wisconsin Immunization Registry system, and the student information systems that we work with here in Wisconsin. So the integration allows schools to import the immunization records into the student information system and avoid the need to manually enter the data for each student at a time. I'm gonna turn it over to Tom to talk more about the technical implementation and the integration and how it works.
Sure. So you can see we have a workflow here, just kind of describes the basic process. Some of these maybe happen in a little bit different order, but this is for the most part kind of how the flow goes. And kind of for the first step, we need to know if a district is going to be interested in getting immunization data through EdFi. And so we need them to opt in through WISE admin. And then they also need to be working with DHS to fill out some additional data to help DHS, the Department of Health Services, get their schools set up inside the WAR system. The next step, we need to set up school accounts in WAR, or DHS needs to set up the school accounts in WAR. They had been getting student records and immunization data sort of at the district level, and I don't think they had the schools, or maybe they had some of them, but the data wasn't quite right. So anyways, this was kind of like a good point for them to sort of work on cleaning up some of their school data. We did build a tool in our EdFi credential application. I think we have a screenshot of that later. We can talk a little bit more about that, but essentially just getting a school ID from them because their school IDs are going to be a little bit different than our school IDs. And I was hoping we could like make them match, but that just didn't work out. So we had to do some mapping in between to match our school ID to their school ID. But yeah, next step. So the SIS or maybe the LEA is going to request the immunization data through the EdFi API, through the SIS product. The only piece of information they really have to send is one WISE ID. Maybe in the future we'll look at doing like a batch. I know some of the vendors were interested in doing that. Doing more than one student at a time. But for, with our Department of Health Services, their system they weren't confident that sending like a big batch request would work. So we just decided to go with one student at a time. So they send us a WISE ID. Then we have all, on the DPI side, we have all of the student data already, so we can pull up the information we need to send onto DHS to make a request. And that includes like first name, last name, birth date, gender, and an address, I believe. Yeah, so that needs to be basically, when it goes over there, it's going to need to be an exact match before it's going to, return anything to us. But let's see. Next step, DHS validates patient demographic data. Yeah, I guess I kind of was already covering that. Like, just needs to be an exact match. If there's multiple matches, it's going to come back with that. And then we just kind of have some error handling, or if there is no match. Yeah, and then essentially the vaccine data hopefully gets back all the way to the suspender and they can display that. We do have a little piece down here that's talking about the difference between HLS7. So the WER system is something called HLS or HL7, and it's just kind of a different format, different protocol, and looks, basically entirely different than JSON, which is what, the EDFI API is usually returning. So we just put some work into mapping that back to JSON. We don't store the data anywhere inside of the EDFI ODS. It's merely a pass-through. So, we do the request all the way over to DHS, and we return that and don't store it anywhere. I know there was some other systems we were looking at, implementing in EDFI like validation messages, and there was, looking at maybe storing the data in the tables or something, like kind of making it work in the normal EDFI pipeline. But this is essentially just a pass through, similar to how identity works.
So Tom, just a quick question on that. What you're getting from the sys vendor is just the WISE ID, and then you are reading all of the information about the student and passing it to the registry, Wisconsin
Yeah,
registry.
yeah, exactly. We have to, I don't know how much to go into about HL7, but you have to essentially speak their language. So you have to pull all the student information out of the EDFI API and sort of format an HL7 message. You have to send along, the school ID that is um, what they're expecting. So you can't use your own school ID. So that kind of goes back to the mapping part. Um,
One thing I wanted to point out too, one of the checks that we added for returning results back to the school districts through their student information system is that each student needs to have an enrollment record or a student school association for authorization. And the reason we implemented that, we didn't want any school to just look up any student that is not enrolled in their school district. So before they can retrieve the immunization records for a student, the student has to have a school enrollment record
So
return information to them.
just one question on the data sharing agreement side. Does the DPI own the data sharing agreement between with the Wisconsin registry, or just the district is having that data sharing agreement signed?
It's handled by both entities. So DHS, when they create an immunization or a WIR account for their schools, and that happens in the first step where they have to work with DHS, or the second step under DHS where they set up an account. So the schools will have to fill out a form and they get an access to that WIR system. The data sharing agreement that happens at our level in the WISE admin is just to let the district know that if you opt into this integration, we are passing on the student WISE ID, the first name, last name, middle name, gender, and address if provided to DHS to do that matching. So that's really the data sharing agreement from our end.
Awesome, thank you.
we have a image on the left here. This is just what the WER looks like, where you would manually come in and maybe edit some immunization records, or pull them for that matter. This is just the test version of it. Yeah. So I think this was built kind of a long time ago. I can't remember exactly how long ago the WER was put up. I feel like it's like 20 years old, but I might be wrong about that. Yeah, and again, when we pull it back, we didn't get a screenshot of that on here. I was just gonna bring up the format the data comes back in when you go against the HL7 or their API. It actually comes back. There's so much different than JSON. It's basically just like fields that are delimited by pipes and carets, and there's no like variable names. So like in JSON on the right, you can see, oh, this is the first name. No, that's not how HL7 looks. So it's just kind of, I just thought that was an interesting part of the project. Like it's very cryptic when you read that. But so we just, essentially map it over to something that's more readable, that, this is how that we're used to seeing it come back in the EdFi API on the right. And we tried to kind of follow the pass-through model that was done in identity. You can see we have a status code and a status message. This one was successful, so it returned the student and the vaccines. But if that wasn't successful, it'd give you an error message, whether it's one of our known L1s, like maybe we didn't find the enrollment. Jada reminded us about that. We have to have the enrollment. Well, that would throw an L1 if it wasn't. Or sometimes there's something that happens at DHS. The WER maybe is experiencing heavy volume, so it kind of timed out or something like that. So might return a message like that as well. And then, underneath that is just kind of the data piece. And you can see a lot of the sort of student demographic information comes back. And, I tried to keep the naming sort of similar to how you would see it in the other EdFi endpoints. The one place where I kind of ran into trouble doing that, obviously, is the actual vaccine, list down below at the bottom. It's kind of highlighted in red. And, there was no verbiage anywhere to go off of. So I just kind of used what was used in the documentation for the HL7. So I think it makes sense kind of, but some of the naming is kind of, I don't know, weird. Like the alternative identifier, for instance, there's an identifier, alternative identifier. I mean, it makes sense. It just kind of, I don't know, just looked kind of weird to me, but I stuck with it because that's what HL7 uses. So.
And really what the vendors use is the identifier, which is the CVX code. So that's on the screen is the 208. And then the vaccine name, and then also the administered date. So that's what they're pulling back into their student information system.
I see.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, you get back different types of, you see the name of the coding system. Sometimes you don't get, or do you usually get a CVX back?
Yeah, the vaccine
Okay.
list that was shared with us by DHS, most vaccines, actually all of them have a CVX code.
It's like it doesn't have to return that. It was kind of an interesting system. Like it might be identified a different way, but
Yeah.
I guess for the most part it uses that. So.
Yeah. And then Tom talked briefly about the LEA opt-in process and also the application or the page that we developed for the Department of Health Services here in Wisconsin to help with that setup. So really what we're doing, like Tom mentioned, so the DHS is taking this project also as an opportunity for them to clean up some of the processes that they have. So in the past, they only had granted the school district a district level account, and now they want each school within the district to have their own account. So with that, they're just creating access for each school and then assigning a WI org ID for each school. And then DHS, sometimes when the school fill out the forms to get access to the WER system, maybe they're not using the same name or the codes that we have for them. So DHS has different codes and sometimes different names for the school. So we kind of give them this tool to just help them identify, is this the same school? So one of the columns is the city. Another column we provided to them, but it's not displayed in this screen, is the physical address, just to make sure that when they're creating an account for a school, that it's the same school that they have in their system. So this page we created, and actually DHS people have access to this page, so they can edit. They can also see who the vendor is, whether they're certified or not certified, is the district opted in, and when they opt in. Once the district opt into the immunization data sharing agreement, we also send out an email notification to DHS telling them that this district opted in. So that will also kick the process for DHS to start onboarding that school and creating the WER account for them. After they create the the account for them, they add in the war org ID in that column. So that column is what then Tom is using, or we're using in the code to make sure that the integration is working. So we need that column, and that is entered by DHS.
Yeah, can't stress how important it was to have this, like stress enough how important it was to have this, because there's so many times people will come back and say it's not working. Well, it just wasn't set up in maybe in on the WER side, the school wasn't set up yet. And before we had this page built, you kind of remember that? Like we had a lot of meetings. You gotta try to work with the agency, whether it's Department of Health Services or whatever department it would be in a different state, but you really got to work closely, and just having some kind of interface like this really helped. Otherwise, we were working off of a spreadsheet at the start, and it was, yeah,
The
this really,
spreadsheet wasn't ideal because a lot of times our school directory gets either school closed or new school added. So we have to always make sure that the spreadsheet is also maintained, and it was really a painful process. So we just decided to create this page for DHS to access and maintain.
this really helped.
And Tom, we have a couple questions, I think, in particular about this dashboard and this what you're showing here. So I'll tackle Brito's first. I'm wondering why the WER could not use the ed org ID setup WPI, or he probably meant set up by WPI.
Yeah, I agree with that. Why not? I don't understand still. It seems like they could just take our ID and use that for the school, because they didn't have the schools already. So it does seem like it would have been easier, but I don't know if we ever got a straightforward answer. They just
I
couldn't.
think they started doing that. I think at
Oh, did
first
they?
because they just didn't, they just relied on the school to give them the information. Even though we have a public school directory that's open for the public, they just weren't really checking that and just relying on the school to provide that information. But now that they have that, I know DHS keeps track of different IDs in their system. So they are using the IDs we have to put that into their system, but they also have to create their own WIR org ID. Which, yeah, I don't know why it can't be just the same ID, but that's the way
I
it is
guwe
right
were
now.
just trying to work with DHS and
Yeah.
do whatever they requested, because otherwise it wouldn't work. Um, I had this thought like, well, why are we even sending, why can't we just send the district, or why can't we just send the state code? I feel like they had some reason they wanted to know where the student, like what school they were at, but I never got a good feeling for why that was. Probably should have had somebody from DHS on the call too, but that's okay.
Sounds like you guys opened up a lot of information sharing that wasn't possible before. So that's probably a win, right? That you guys now have this connection. Okay, so a couple more questions, and maybe you'll get to this later in the presentation, but Debbie wants to know, once in this is, how do schools complete their immunization report? And also, how do the records get added to the WER?
The records get added to the WER by the healthcare providers. Now, some schools in Wisconsin, if they do administer the vaccines, they also have access to edit the WER system. And as soon as that information, the vaccine information added in WER, then once the student information system send that GET request, then everything will be displayed. And the SIS vendors, we had to work with the SIS vendors. So we had to certify the SIS vendors who implemented this integration. It's an optional integration here in Wisconsin. We have about 6 SIS vendors who implemented this. Most of them are the large vendors, so it covers a lot of our schools as well. And we had to go through an integration testing process with them to just make sure how they handle that import, because schools already had data that's manually entered. And now if they're trying to pull everything and import it, they will be potential duplicates. So we want to make sure that that's handled properly within the student information system. So we have a lot of use cases to make sure that that's covered. And we kind of tested that with our vendors as well. And each vendor implemented a different solution. But if there's a vaccine that it has the same code and it has the same date, or maybe it has a similar date that it's within 2 weeks, then that's get flagged and it doesn't override the manually entered vaccine, but it's flagged so the users can review it and just make sure that it's accurate. There's a lot in the last slide of the presentation. There are resources, and all our use cases and documentations are also referenced there. So I would just encourage you to just take a look there and see all the different use cases of how the vendors pull that information back into their student information system. I hope that answers your question, Debbie.
Thank you, Jada. Coming back to the feedback, tell us what you have heard from your districts and vendors in terms of you onboarding them, and how did they feel about this system, this passback API? Were they welcoming it, or was there a pushback, or what did you hear from them?
Yeah, actually, no, the SIS vendors were really great. So like I said, we have 6 vendors that implemented this integration. Infant Campus, Skyward for both products, SMS and Cumulative, Power School, and also JMC, which is one of the vendors here that support a lot of districts closer to Minnesota. And then we also have Facts, or previously it was called RenWeb. They support a lot of the choice schools here in Wisconsin. They're a choice school only vendor. So those vendors implemented the integration and jumped right into it as soon as we shared the specs. They started looking into it and implemented it. And the feedback that we got from the district, honestly, this has been the most popular integration that we have worked on. We are getting feedback from, usually when we implement an integration, we really have to promote it and have like a marketing strategy campaign to have the district use it. But this one, actually, we didn't have to do any of that. Districts really wanted this integration, and we're very excited about it. From the data that I pulled in before the presentation, we have about 648 LEAs that have a SIS vendor who implemented this project. And out of those, about half of them have opted in and are using the integration. The other half, maybe they just haven't opted in, or maybe they're smaller and just going to the WAR system is not a big deal for them. But what we've learned from the district, that this really saved them a lot of time spent on repetitive tasks. It also helped them improve the accuracy and the completeness of the immunization data. And we implemented this when COVID was just started. So it really helped us to find the COVID-19 vaccine whenever available for the children and adolescents that are enrolled in their school.
Awesome.
We even had district ask us if we wanted to have this available for the staff and not just for students, but because of the FERPA laws that we can't really display the staff information, only the student information.
Do you remember if this project started because of COVID, or did we already have this on the map?
We had it on the map,
Okay.
but really COVID pushed it forward.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. This is a great effort, and thank you also for sharing it with the EdFi community. We appreciate it, and I see Brito's comment there, nice feature out of the box. So thanks a lot for all the hard work that the Wisconsin team has put in. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for allowing us to share with the community.
Caroline, back to you.
Okay, perfect. So we are doing so good on our time. Good job, team. We were at 30 minutes. So we'll just, if there aren't any other questions, well, if there are, feel free to ask them now, but just leave you guys with a final thought. But we would love to see you at our user conference called the EdFi Summit. This year, the summit will be November 6th through 8th in Austin. It is our 10-year anniversary of kind of the Ed5 movement. So it's going to be really exciting, and it'll be a big celebration. You can go directly to that URL. Also, it's on our website. It's on all of our social medias constantly and our newsletters. We really want you guys to attend this summit, and this is just a sampling of some of the awesome stories and case studies that you're going to hear from our community. So if you're new to Ed5, the summit is really where you want to be to learn from all of these leaders like Jada and Tom. So thank you all. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. So with that, we'll end the webinar. And thank you both, Jada and Tom, for joining us, and Saeed for leading. And have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jada and Tom.